on Zoom coming in right now, and those who are patiently waiting on YouTube, hello, how are you? My name is Robert Scrobe. I am the person behind the Global Virtual Design Sprint, and this is remotely interesting with my protege, my partner, my design, and I would say design mind that we were doing, Sandy Lamb. And today we have a very special guest with us. It's Alberto Savoia. He is the author of The Right It, Why So Many Ideas Fail and How to Make Yours Succeed. He's the Innovation Agitator Emeritus at Google, lecturer and innovation consultant at Stanford University's D.School and Technology Ventures program, as well as the founder of Pretotype Labs in Mountain View, California. He's agreed to come on and do a Q&A session on pretotyping. Now, for those of you who are familiar with pretotyping, this is going to be really exciting because I've been in this space for about 4 months now, actually longer than that. I think my first impression was when I was standing at the DMV, and Alberto already knows that story. But Alberto, maybe that's a good place to start. Let's get into like, what is pretotyping? If people have never heard it before, they're coming into this fresh. What would be a good kind of introduction to the process and what you've created?
First of all, thank you, Robert. Thank you, Sandy. I want to be clear. I didn't agree to be on this Zoom. I offered it, and I offered it because, as you will see, I'm a big believer in skin in the game, and you've been doing excellent work. And so, rather than just telling you good work, which cost me nothing, I decided to give you 1 hour of my time, which cost me a lot, right? So it would cost you a lot if you had to pay for it. So this is my way of saying thank you for bringing the ball forward and for teaching other entrepreneurs how to validate ideas before going forward. Because the whole reason for me doing this is because I believe that entrepreneurs and innovators are our most valuable resource, right? They're the ones that will change the world, have the great ideas. And it just breaks my heart to see so many of them fail for the wrong reason. So, you know, I hate failure. Failure bit me in the butt. And I decided to fight back, and that's why I started to do pretotyping. So thank you all, and thank you all for coming. So what is pretotyping? Essentially is a set of very simple, very powerful tool techniques and tactics to make sure that you have the right it, meaning the right idea, the right product, the right service before you build it, right? So pretotyping is a set of techniques that I collected. I added some techniques to them. I added some tools, and then I wrapped them around under this umbrella called pretotyping. Some people, a very small minority, don't like the term. They don't think that the term pretotyping is necessary, that it's good enough to call it a prototype. I've done a few videos explaining why that's not the case, but just to put it very briefly, a prototype can end up costing a lot of time, a lot of money. Usually they're designed to prove if something works or not. A pretotype has only one purpose: to validate that the market is interested in your product. And that to me is the most important thing. This is the number one question you need to ask, because 99% of the time you can build what you plan to build, and 80 to 90% of the time you probably shouldn't have built it because the market is not interested. So that's the most I can do for an introduction, because this is mostly for Q&A for people that already have a rough idea of what pretotyping is. So look forward to your questions. It's great. It's just like being on Jeopardy, except that I'm an expert in all the categories. I mean, how can I fail? Look it. I love it. Let's go.
So to an extent, you've already pretotyped your way through virtue of practice into a position where your chances of market failure are probably in that less than 10%, where you're in the 90% range, in other words.
Let's hope so, yes.
So give you a little bit of the why behind why I'm doing this. There was a point in the last major event I did where we had 11 teams all working on really interesting ideas, anywhere from a hydro park, where it was hydrogen related park, where you could have an amusement park, but also learn how hydrogen was created, all the way to projects on domestic violence and other interesting topics. But every team had this feeling like they wanted to move forward, but they didn't know how. So when I came across pretotyping and the concept of this, I thought, there's the missing link. That could be something that these teams could take forward and really try out what their idea is before they put a lot of time and effort into it, and then decide if, based on the market reaction, if they can move forward and do something in particular. So it's been a learning process for a lot of them that are used to kind of staying within a design sprint and just being that way. And then at the end going, where do we go from here? It really serves to preface or even before a design sprint happens to validate whether or not your idea works. So I'd like to start the questions around the question around pretotype or prototype. In your opinion, can both happen at the same time, and if so, in what order? What would you say is the appropriate?
So a very good question. I'm an engineer, kind of a mathematician. I like to have precise definition. So a pretotype is something that you build to collect data, real actual data, to see if the market is interested in your product. A prototype is something that you build to see if you can build that product, if you can execute that idea. Can they coexist? Absolutely. So one could say that once you have an artifact, let's consider it a prototype, it can become a pretotype if you use it to collect data about the market desirability for that product. So I'll give you my favorite example of all time, one of the most beautiful prototypes and pretotype, and that is the Tesla Roadster by Elon Musk. So for those of you who don't know the story, the original Tesla was a little roadster, $120,000 two-seater. Elon Musk, when he was starting to explain his idea to people, it sounded like a crazy idea, right? Electric cars had mostly failed, and he was planning to do an electric car that cost $120,000, and he had never built a car company before. So you can imagine in Thoughtland, where people just discuss ideas, that was not a big hit. So what did he do? He took a Lotus Elise, which was already a pretty sporty car, ripped off the gasoline engine, put in an electric engine, and so he built a one-off prototype of this amazing car that would go 0 to 60 in 5 seconds. So now, once he had the prototype, he turned it into a pretotype. How? By using it to collect data with skin in the game. So what did he do with that prototype? He didn't go around asking people, do you like it? Would you buy it? Maybe he did that, but that doesn't count as data, right? If you read my book, people's opinion and promises don't count. What he did, he used that prototype, gave people some rides, he showed it in photos and said, if you would like one of these, just send me a check for $5,000 and you can get on the waiting list. So this is an example of how you can use a prototype, a one-off, to turn it into a pretotype, because the job of a pretotype is to collect market data about desirability. And I think we can agree that getting checks for $5,000 for a car that you would have to wait 2 to 3 years to get by a guy that never built a car company before, and that requires a charger in the garage, and for which there is no, at the time, network of chargers, that is a big commitment and a strong indication of market interest.
So in that example, that's one where you're kind of getting feedback from the market on whether or not that car is something people would want. But generally, for people that are getting into prototyping or practicing it, how would you recommend going about setting the target measurement, or the target of what you're after? Like 30% of people will do X, or 10 people out of 100 will do this. Is it conditional upon the actual experiment, or do you have any guidelines for that?
No, so what you're talking about is what I call the XYZ hypothesis. So one of the most important things is when you start a project, you have to have a clear idea of how would you define success or how you define failure. So a lot of people write business plans, which I think should just be ripped apart, and or do very complex scenarios. And I distilled it into the simplest, easiest to remember, and yet hard way of explaining what your idea is. And I call it the XYZ hypothesis, which goes as follows. It's very simple. At least X% of Y will do Z. So Y is your target market. Z is what you expect them to do. And X% is the percentage of people that you expect to be interested in your product. So going back to the Tesla Roadster example, the XYZ hypothesis might have been at least 0.1% of millionaire geeks in Silicon Valley will pay $120,000 for an all-electric car. Now, the question is, Robert, where do I come up with that percentage, right? So where do I get that percentage of the market? That comes from viability. So those of you familiar with design thinking, you have three important aspects for success, things you need for success. Your idea must be desirable, feasible, meaning you can build it, and viable, meaning that you can have a sustainable business built over it. I focus very much on the desirability part. Does the market want it? But you must determine beforehand what percentage of the market do you need to have interested in your idea for it to succeed. So for something like the Tesla Roadster or Tesla cars that are pretty expensive, it can be a very small number, like 1% of millionaire or well-off geeks, and I use the term geeks in the being one of them, in the most positive terms, people that like these technology things. If you're starting something like Netflix, for example, I don't think Netflix could succeed if the premise was 1% of households will have a Netflix subscription. It wouldn't provide them with enough material for original content. So determining that very important percentage in X percent of Y will do Z is determined by what the viability for the businesses.
Mm-hmm. But how do you even reach those markets? Like, because if you have the prototype, how do you get to them? Like, say, for example, if the Netflix example is the general household of the whole world or something, how do you even bring the prototype to the whole world and try it out?
So let's go, good. Let's do the example with Netflix. First of all, Netflix started by delivering DVDs, right? So that required a much less scalable infrastructure. So when Netflix went to mostly online, streaming, they already were a huge and successful company. So they had the resources. But at the beginning, how could you prototype if people would be interested in this subscription model? Well, the original Netflix, you paid $12, $20, I forget exactly what it is, and then you could get between 1 and 5 DVDs at any one time. No late fees, nothing. You could start a business with a prototype very, very simply. In fact, you don't need any DVD inventory, right? You could have a website where you can show all the DVDs, all the titles that you would want, and then you send it. The way I would do it, I would send it to 10 people, send an invitation, and see, would you like to subscribe? The first, maybe the first month is free. And then based on the orders that I would get, I would probably buy those DVDs and deliver them without having any inventory. This, by the way, is the same way that Zappos, which sells shoes online, they started their business. They just had a website that this premise people would buy shoes online if they can return them for free. They launched the website with 0 shoe inventory, and they just used, as people bought shoes, they used to send it to them. So you always start small.
So in other words, you actually would pick who you want to test, right?
That's right. You pick in the XYZ, when the Y in the XYZ hypothesis is your target market. So if my target market, when I say, so let me contrast it with what typically happens. People who have an idea either tell it to people verbally, and then as they communicate it, it gets lost in translation, or they write these very, very long business plans, right? Which are just full of hype and hope and hypothesis, and this will happen, and then that will happen, this magic thing will happen. With the XYZ hypothesis, it's almost like an elevator pitch with numbers, right? I force you to say who your target market is, and it can be as broad as you want. So for example, for Netflix, it could be all world households, all households that have internet access, right? And then, if you have at least 10% of those, you can have a business. For something like Tesla, it would be rich, let's say, wealthy people who like technology. So the point of the XYZ is to take those very, very hard questions and deciding who is your market. A final comment I will say, I was also explaining this to my class earlier this week. Remember algebra, XYZs were the letters we use for unknown variables, right? So when you have an XYZ hypothesis, essentially you're making a guess. These are my own unknown variable. Who really is my market? I can guess. What percentage of it can I capture, and what will they do? You create a hypothesis, because the job of a hypothesis has only one job: to be tested, to be validated. And that's why this works, and it works so well, and it's quite simple.
So if we were to pivot a little bit and talk about prototyping remotely, since we're kind of in the middle of a pandemic where most of us have been shut-ins for a while, do you have any best practices for prototyping remotely?
Well, one of the things I always tell my students is you must ask a specific question. If you ask a general questions, I can only give you a general answer. Can you give me a specific product that you have or idea that you have in mind? And then let's see if we can prototype it remotely. Because I mean, a lot of prototypes are remote, right? A lot of things you could do online. Does anybody have an idea? I love working with fresh ideas that I've never heard that you would like to prototype remotely.
Looking at the chat here.
I know, I was saying the same thing. It's like some people are going, yeah, I'll raise my hand. I got one. But best to put it in chat or in the Q&A, and we can actually like bring those over so that we don't crowd the same kind of space. I mean, I can say that I'll do one specific thing. What we did, because we're all remote in this event that we've done, we prototyped a educational system where it was basically in the virtual space for the kind of learning that you would do if you're like motivational learning. So we posited and did a prototype on that, but our engagement model was a survey. We basically, with the time that we had, we didn't have something where we put an ad against it, but we posited that there was a virtual a virtual school that basically dealt with learning remotely, but doing it through a different like kind of engagement model. And we showed pictures, we showed different designs, and we asked for both donations and for email addresses for people that wanted to get in touch with the development of the process, or at least as we were making updates. And it didn't quite hit the percentage we were looking for, but it did give us validation that, and also feedback on what people were kind of keying into. And maybe this is probably a good follow-up question. Is there a difference in the feedback you get from people if they actually give you skin in the game versus they don't give you skin in the game?
Yeah, so by the way, I would like to bring up my favorite tool, the skin in the game caliper. That I actually used in my class earlier this week to give an example. So skin in the game, by the way, for those of you who are not familiar with the book or the term, skin in the game means that somebody has something at risk, right? When they give you feedback. So in my world, if people if they reply to survey, if they like a video, if they tell you, yes, I would buy, if they give you an opinion, those things have zero value. To me, they do not count as data. I only count data if it has skin in the game, which means you must get one of the following from your market. If it's a product that sells for money, ideally, you want them to pay for it, right? Just like the way Elon Musk did. If they really want it, they'll give you a deposit or find a way to fund it in some other ways. Short of that, you can get them to commit their time, right? That's what I'm doing now. I like what you're doing, so I'm giving you my skin in the game in the form of time. They can give you information like an email address or something basic. They can offer your reputation to recommend it. But I would say that unless the market gives you some skin in the game, you cannot go ahead with the idea with any confidence that it will succeed. And think about it, as an entrepreneur, you're putting a tremendous amount of your own skin in the game, right? Some of you, I mean, a lot of the people that send me emails, they read my book, say, oh, Alberto, thank God I read the book. I was about to quit my job to start this thing. And then I read it and I realized that I don't have to do that. So those are the good letters. The bad letters are people who said, I wish I'd known about this 3 years ago before I left my beautiful job and, mortgage my house to launch this idea only to find out that it would not work. So entrepreneurs put a lot of skin in the game. And I say, get a little skin in the game in the market. I mean, again, let's build up upon the examples of Tesla. Launching a new car company is not an easy thing. It's probably one of the biggest things you could do. And he would not have done it unless he had some skin in the game, some early deposits to, in fact, he collected, I think, a few hundred deposits for $5,000 that gave him the confidence that people really would have gone for that car. So get skin in the game from the market.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask you, so like if you said that when we are willing to give the time out, that is already part of like the skin of the game. But but you also mentioned that filling out a survey is really like worth nothing in a way. But I was wondering, people are still spending time to fill out the survey. So wouldn't that be like spending time already?
Yes, if you want, if they're filling in a survey and giving you their email, and by the way, you must not pay them to fill the survey, right? So if you have something like a focus groups, I have a chapter in my book called Hocus Pocus Focus Groups. They're the best way to spend a lot of money and to be steered into the right direction, into the wrong direction. Why? Because what is a focus group? And I've participated. I love participating. You know, they pay me to give me my opinion. I said, hey, Alberto, you know, would you buy this? You know, you like the black one or you like the pink one? And then I give them feedback, and then they give me $20 for participating. So they're kind of giving you their time, but you're paying for them, and people love to hear themselves talk. So focus groups, I mean, just avoid them at all cost, right? Instead, what you want to do is say, if people take time to fill in a survey, yes, it gives you a level of interest. But then I tell you what, so let's say you survey 1,000 people, and out of those 1,000 people, you have 200 telling you, yes, I would be interested in buying the product, okay? Here's what always happens, always. You tell those people, okay, thank you for saying you're going to buy my product. The product is now ready. Can you know, here's where you buy. How many of those 200 do you think will actually show up that reply to the survey? A very, very small number. So that's the, you know, being scientifically and mathematically oriented, that's I put in a lot of discount. So answers on the survey, I discount them 99% because you're very unlikely to get to turn them into actual customers and users.
If you're just tuning in, we're speaking to Alberto Savoia, the author of The Right It and Why So Many Ideas Fail and How to Make Yours Succeed. He's also the founder of Pretotype Labs out in Mountain View, California. I did have a follow-up question to that, in that
Sure.
you have both in the book a skin in the game caliper and a TRI meter, which is the Right It meter for measuring success. Are there particular situations where one is warranted more than the other?
No, they actually work together. So let me explain an example. Let's assume that I have a service. You know, since you brought up the coronavirus, which is kind of, so let's date these these interviews. So let's come up with an idea for coronavirus. So we've been told that theoretically, when you go shopping, you should kind of find a way to sanitize your groceries and bags, you know, and leave them in decontamination areas, which is a real pain in the neck, right? So I thought, well, what about a service where you just buy the groceries and they come and they disinfect everything for you? And it's just an idea. Don't take it seriously. So let's say that I actually want to do this. I happen to live in Mountain View, you know, in a community with about 170 houses. We have a mailing list, right? So I can reach all of my neighbors through a mail message. The way I would test the interest in this idea is pretty simple. I would, you know, set up a web page, and I would say, hey, there is this new service. You know, if you want somebody to disinfect your groceries for $10, you know, any amount of groceries, I would send the email, and then I would get them to see how many of them would sign up. And then, because I know I can launch the service, I would try to get that number and measure skin in the game. So say if I ask them $10 deposit, so I will sanitize your groceries once a week, and I collect the $10, then that is skin in the game. Now, what you're talking about is the Right It meter. That information goes into the Right It meter, which, by the way, if you haven't read the book, this doesn't make much sense. It's a tool to help you determine how many experiments you need to do to increase your level of confidence that your idea will succeed. Now, so let's play the game. Let's say I advertise my idea for sanitation to 100 of my neighbors, and 80 of them reply and send me their email address that they're interested, okay, in one scenario. In another scenario, I get 5 replies, but each of them, you know, sends me via Venmo $10. Which of these do you think gives you more confidence that the idea will be successful? 80 people saying, yes, I want it, or 5 people giving you actually the $10 you're looking forward to?
Yeah, definitely the ones.
Definitely
give you
the
the
other
money.
ones.
Yeah.
That's right. Nothing compares to that. I have students coming to me said, hey, Alberto, we did this video. We got 140,000 views in 24 hours. So everybody's excited about this product. I said, okay, great. That's a good start. Now, how many of them can you convert to buyers? Sometimes the number, you know, is what? Sometimes the number is an absolute zero. It's very hard to get people to give you money. In fact, I don't often quote myself, but when I do, it's a good quote. And this is one of my favorite quotes is, it's easier to get people to open their mouths than to open their wallet. If you can get them to open their wallet, you really know that you're onto something.
That's also my favorite quote.
I've been saying it all week. So when I try to explain it, it's like, yeah, there's the bridge right there. So how do moral and business ethics play together with the pretotyping concept? Are there any limits of fake it till you make it?
Yeah. So first of all, let me say this: the most unethical thing as an entrepreneur, as an innovator, that you can do is to not pretotype your idea. Why do I say that? Because if you're an innovator or an entrepreneur, you're one of our most valuable resources. And if you don't pretotype and validate your idea, chances are that you will fail, the idea will fail, and then we will have wasted one of our most valuable resources. Now, for those of you who studied ethics, and actually I have, and by the way, you cannot teach at any major university without making sure that everything that you're teaching, is ethical and politically correct and everything. So I've actually had several discussions with professors about this. So let me start with the following assumption. To not pretotype is unethical because you're probably going to fail and you're wasting some valuable resource. Now, all ethical problems can be summarized into the trolley problem, which you're all familiar with, right? The trolley problem in philosophy is, there is a trolley or a train going, and you have a switch, and it can either hit 5 people, or if you turn the switch, it hits another person. So all problems in ethics are not just black or white, but you just need to make a decision. So with pretotyping, what you're doing is the following. Let's assume you have a fake door website. Let's say that my product for sanitizing my idea for sanitizing groceries after I go shopping does not exist. So I create a website, I advertise this product, it doesn't actually exist. Am I doing the ethical thing there? Well, let's look at it this way. So let's assume I advertise it to 100 people and 95% of them ignore it. So they're not hurt at all, right? Right. They're not interested in the product. It's just like seeing another ad as you go through the web. Doesn't mean anything. You agree? No pain, no gain. Now, there are 5 people who signed up for it, sent me the email, said, yes, Alberto, I'm interested. So this is what you can do. And by the way, it's a fake door. So I have no intention of starting the service. I just want to make sure that there's enough of a market. First of all, by clicking yes, I'm interested, they are voting. So every time somebody clicks on a fake door, what they're doing is voting, expressing that they're interested in the idea, thus increasing the probability that this idea will come into fruition. Thirdly, you can do something for these people, and I always do it. In fact, I spent, I have a whole section on the book on how to do pretotyping in the most ethical way. If they click on it, you say, look, sorry, Bob, my neighbor, right? I know that you were interested in this. Actually, I was just validating the idea. The service is not ready, but I tell you what, the next time you go to Costco and you bring your groceries, I will come and, clean them freely for you. So there is always a way to do pretotyping, even the fake door pretotype, in a way that is completely ethical from beginning to end. And I would say it is always ethical to do pretotyping, and never, it is unethical not to do it.
And how do you handle the situation like when you pretotype that actually gets money from people, but then you may not end up actually building that in the end?
Oh, you mean like Kickstarter? Yes, yeah. Like many products on Kickstarters, right? Well, here's what I say: do not. First of all, you give refunds. So let's use the Tesla example, since that's a big one. That's a big pretotype, right? So you get $5,000. Those people, you let them know at the beginning. They said, look, this is a deposit. It is fully refundable. If we cannot build it, we will give the money back to you, right? Which in the Tesla case, it has not happened. So pretotyping is not a way to actually fund your idea. If you want to fund your idea, you should use Kickstarter. But I recommend, by the way, I love Kickstarter. Kickstarter is great, but there are three things about Kickstarter which make it a good step after you pretotype the idea. First of all, with Kickstarter, you let the whole world know about your idea, right? So the cat is out of the bag. Second, it can take quite a bit of effort to have a nice Kickstarter campaign, right? You have to create a beautiful video. I mean, there are several steps to be approved. And third, as you mentioned, Sandy, if you get 10,000 orders for, let's say, your Pebble watch, then you're stuck delivering them, yeah. Right? And if you don't, people are disappointed. A friend of mine is a big fan of Kickstarter. He said 3 of the last 4 things that he's funded on Kickstarter never got delivered. So yeah, that is an issue, but that is not a part of Pretotyping if you don't refund the money. That would be a little bit unethical.
Mm-hmm. How do you Pretotype something that is a little bit more sensitive? So the things that we have been talking about, like groceries and like cars, like, yeah. But what if a topic, because I just reflecting back to the last sprint that I was involving, which is about domestic violence, super sensitive topic. And we were kind of struggling, like, could we actually move to a Pretotype kind of phase? Because like, how do we deal with the victims in a way, right? You know.
Right. But what was the idea that you want to Pretotype? I need the specific, and then I'll tell you how I would do it.
I know Lisa is on the chat, so maybe she can also type in, give a little bit more detail. But what I remember was that we were thinking also to have a little starting page, and then we will have this little app, and then ask them for a survey, and if they could fill out, and also if they could give like a little donation or something to say like this is to validate that they would be actually into this idea.
Okay, so first of all, you see, Sanya, I'm going to use this as an example of the vague and fuzzy way that people communicate the idea. So what you gave me is what people call an elevator pitch, right? It has no numbers. It is not very precise to me. So let's use this. That's why I want people to use the XYZ hypothesis. So let's work together in coming up with an XYZ hypothesis. 10%, let's say 10%, we'll just make up the number. Who is your target market for this app?
So let's say like 10% of the victims in America. Okay,
so 10% of people who have suffered domestic abuse. So far, so good. Okay, so see, X%, at least 10% of people who have suffered domestic abuse. What is the action that you expect them to take? You know, once your app and everything is ready.
If they would give us a little donation to say they would be willing to contribute to building the app. Okay, so 10% of people who have suffered domestic abuse would be willing to donate, say, at least $10 to fund this this service. So is this the XYZ? For example, yeah. Okay, good. So I don't see any ethical problem for this, right? Even though it's sensitive, you're going after a sensitive thing. You're actually trying to do something good. So what you would do is you would set up a website saying what we want to do is to come up with an app to help people report, you know, domestic abuse. I don't know exactly what you want to do, but there is, you know, as long as you're upfront about what you're doing, I don't see any challenge, even though the topic is sensitive. Mm. But yeah. Do you agree that do you see how the XYZ hypothesis made it very sharp immediately? I know. Right? Yeah. Before I had no idea what you were talking about. I tell you, write the XYZ hypothesis, it's clear. In fact, you know, there are a lot of nice things out there. There are business plans, there are canvases, there are this and that. Those must follow. To me, the XYZ hypothesis is just like algebra, right? Algebra, it's a foundation. You need it for everything. The tools I teach are very, very basic because the focus of my work is at the very, very beginning. Do people want the idea? Is the market interested in the ideas? And the tools for doing that is just like, you know, like your basic algebra. Then you can turn it into calculus and physics and send rockets into space. But unless you have the basics, to me, you're nothing. So I tell all my students, whatever your idea is, you should communicate to me using only one language. Tell me your XYZ hypothesis. And if you cannot articulate it, you have nothing. You just have a bunch of fuzzy ideas.
So how do you deal with ideas that feel wrong but end up working really well?
Well, give me an example.
So in the book, you mentioned something about when you first heard of Twitter and the idea of what it was all about. You were like, why would somebody send a bunch of individual messages to each other? It doesn't make much sense. Yet it went on to commercial success. So if there's a particular idea that someone comes up with that doesn't feel intuitively right, but when you put it through your process ends up working really well, how does someone kind of deal with the idea that they're the problem or they're the blocker, like they have an idea suppression reflex, in other words?
Yeah, so in my experience, people who come with an ideas, they have the opposite. They just fall in love with their ideas and they believe that their ideas cannot possibly fail, right? So they just, it's very rare that people have an idea and they think, I don't know if it works. I mean, if that's the case, that's when they need to prototype. So the people who come up with the ideas, usually they love their idea and they think, they're convinced that it will fail, right? Love is blind. The problem is that when you go and tell other people what the idea is, when other people hear the idea, they think it's a crazy idea. I'll give you something even better than Twitter, something I felt much more strongly against that it was bound to fail, and that is Uber. To me, the first time somebody described Uber, I thought, listen, this makes no sense to me, you know. I mean, or Airbnb, right? The initial Airbnb was couch surfing. You pay $50 to spend money in a stranger's couch. So I thought the combination of these two translated in my mind to strangers pick up other strangers from strange places like the airport, and they drive them to spend the night in a stranger's house. That's the plot for most horror movies, right? It's a good plot for horror movies. So in my mind, both Uber and Airbnb, the couch surfing variety, didn't make any sense. How did they validate it? Clearly, the Uber and the Airbnb people thought that they had something. So in the case of Uber, they started testing it with 3 cars in New York City, you know, and sending the app to a small number of people, and they found out that they use the service. In the case of Airbnb, famously, they offered the first couch surfing by taking 3 air mattresses and offering them in the room in San Francisco for $80 an hour. And the first night, 2 men and 1 woman signed up to share an air mattress in a stranger's house with 2 other strangers. So that's a perfect example of skin in the game, literally, right? Again, that's how horror movies start. You agree to spend the house in a stranger's house and pay them $80. So whether you believe in the idea or not, you have to go out and test your intuition.
And it was my mistake. When I was referring to it before, was Uber, actually, when you went through that, not Twitter. Okay. I don't think that was one. So, but no,
I felt the same about Twitter too. Yes, I feel, you see, people say, Alberto, to this day, right? People read the book and they send me question, Alberto, this is my idea. What do you think? And I told them, have you read the book? My opinion doesn't matter, right? I thought the web van was going to be a huge success. I thought that right now I'd be running a Segway scooter and most of my people in Mountain View would be riding Segway scooter. I thought that Uber would fail, that Airbnb was a terrible idea, and that Twitter was also possibly quite the worst possible way that we could communicate as a species, all of which has been wrong. So never ask me for my opinion. Like Socrates, you know, I think I'm wise, but in the Socrates ways, I'm wise because I know that I don't know anything. That's why I tell you, whatever your idea is, test it. Don't trust me or don't trust anybody else's opinion.
Just see what the market has to say about it.
Yes.
We're speaking to, if you're tuning in a little late, we're speaking to Alberto Savoia, the author of The Right It, Why So Many Ideas Fail and How to Make Yours Succeed. He's also the founder of Pretotype Labs in Mountain View, California. Alberto, we're going to get a little bit into the questions that have been posed here on Zoom that people have been listening in. The first one's coming from Alexander Bach out in Munich, Germany. And he says, what is the difference between the lean startup approach and Pretotyping? What do they have in common?
Hi, Alexander. Thank you for your question. Well, the way I see it, and by the way, this is not the way I position it, is my students who are familiar with lean startup, you know, that attend the d.School at Stanford and they're familiar with sprints, the way they put it is this: Alberto, Pretotyping makes the lean startup even leaner, makes design thinking even more thoughtful, and makes sprints even faster. So I used before an analogy that Pretotyping, the tools and techniques I teach are just like algebra, right? Algebra 101. They're fundamental to anything else that you want to do. The lean startup is how to build a lean company, right? The whole lean organization. But before you can try to run a lean company, you have to make sure that your product is the right it. So the lean startup covers a lot of bases, and from beginning to end, but I go very, very deep in the very first part, testing the desirability of the product. At this point, I don't worry at all about the viability or the feasibility. I just focus on the desirability, and I give you very precise tools, precise to say it with numbers and collecting data to make sure that your idea is desirable. After which, go on and build a lean company, but just make sure that before you try to build that lean company, your idea is the right fit. Otherwise, you're going to be so lean that you will die.
And we don't want that to happen in any
That's
capacity.
right.
Margaret Ricci has a follow-up question to that, where she asks, does Pretotyping work well with the business model canvas / value proposition canvas?
Yeah, hi, Margaret. Yes, again, Pretotyping works deliciously well with all of these. It's at the very beginning. It's like saying, does algebra work well with calculus? Does algebra work well with physics? Absolutely. So the way I see it, just like with the Sandy was kind enough to play with me for that example, the foundation of Pretotyping. When people say, I have an idea, how do I Pretotype it? I tell them, write down the XYZ hypothesis. And I'm sorry I'm banging on this, but it is just so important. It clarifies so many things. And by the way, the XYZ hypothesis combines two of the big things that I learned working at Google. Two of the famous expressions at Google is data beats opinion, and the other one is say it with numbers, right? So you want to say with number, be as specific as possible. Once you have the XYZ hypothesis, you validated, 30% of people who suffer domestic abuse will contribute to this, are interested in this project, then you can go on and build a more complex canvas. But why treat things in a complicated way until you have the basics? The basics are fundamental. You cannot get around them. So don't do too much work until you've confirmed that the basics are in place. Thank you for the question, Margaret.
We had another one, but they didn't leave their name. So this is from someone anonymous. Mr. Anonymous or Miss Anonymous. It says, in your experience, how do large existing organizations who are trying Pretotyping get around legal complications related to offering services and products that don't actually exist?
That's a very good question. So, by the way, I should be clear that most of my income, most of my work comes from very large companies, Fortune 500. They want to innovate like startups, and they're just faced with this problem, right? The famous innovators dilemma. So it clearly depends on the kind of company and product that you want to build. So if you're in the pharmaceutical industry, for example, this is one of those cases where you shouldn't do a fake door. Say, oh, there is this terrible disease, and by the way, we have the cure for the disease, and then you find out that it doesn't exist. That's where you're crossing into unethical territories. Now, there are also regulation, right? There are some very regulated industry with whom and I've worked with all of them. So there is the financial industry, there is the insurance industry. We already mentioned the medical, pharmaceutical industry. So a lot of these industries are very regulated. Now, this is my experience, not my opinion, not my thoughts, not my preferences, my belief, my experience with these companies. They often use these regulations as an excuse for not innovating, because when I work with them, I teach them several ways that they can get around the restrictions. First of all, they can spawn off. Some of them are worried about their brands. They can spawn off, a side company, an area that part of the company that's more experimental, like Google has Google X, right? Or Walmart has Walmart Labs when they can do these experiments. As far as coming around the rules and regulation and the laws, let me give a concrete example, because otherwise this sounds too fuzzy. I don't like fuzzy things. I like to give concrete examples. Let's take self-driving cars. Now, you want to talk about regulations, laws, permits, et cetera, et cetera. That is a big messy thing. As an engineer at Google, I had no doubt that we would have self-driving cars, by 2020 in some form or another. But I had 100% certainty that I wouldn't see them in the streets of Mountain View because the government, all the agencies would not allow. But this is what I've learned, and clearly that's the case. I live in Mountain View. We have Waymo, we have Neuro, we have all kinds of unmanned vehicles going around. So here's what I've learned. If there is a market, there is a way. if the market is interested in self-driving cars, the rules and regulations will adapt. Okay, so the market is clearly interested in self-driving cars. The companies are willing to invest, and they're changing the rules and regulation and getting the permits. Let's take another example that you all know about. Let's go back to Uber. You know, Uber was resisted for a very long time. It wasn't allowed at the airport. Some cities didn't allow, some country, right? Sandy, in Germany, I think, is Uber allowed in Germany now?
They started to.
They started, right, but at the beginning, no way, right? Yeah. I think
some areas still don't, so yeah. Yeah,
some areas don't do it. So, but yet, in the same in the US, but yet companies find a way. So, you know, one of my other famous quotes that I like is, if there is a market, there is a way around the regulation. I work with financial companies that have said, we cannot do this, we cannot do that because of this, because of that. Then guess what? Some other company did it, right? I mean, taking the financial services or Robinhood or Wealthfront or some of these other companies that are doing things that they thought they couldn't do. In the insurance companies, a lot of companies wanted to do this pay per mile, but they thought, well, we cannot do pay per mile because there are all these privacy concerns. They don't do it. And then another company, a startup, starts and do it. And so I would say there may be some regulation you cannot get over, but in most cases, do not use those as an excuse. If there is a market, find out that if people want the product, and then you worry about getting around the regulations.
Karina Sotnick out in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, has a question about like something that needs serious validation. So her question was, how do you pretotype a product that needs a serious testing and validation phase, like a medical device?
Well, okay. First of all, remember, pretotyping is about determining desirability. And so a lot of people say, it's fine. A lot of people have questions about COVID. Said, Alberto, how do you pretotype a COVID vaccine? I say, you don't need to pretotype that, right? You know, you're pretty much guaranteed the desirability of that product. So there are two aspects, right? A pretotype and prototype. A prototype is meant to, you know, you're building something to prove if it works, and then a pretotype to see if the market is interested. Now, in the case of medical devices, if you are confident that you can actually build the product, you just want to validate validate the market, there are several techniques that you can use. By the way, the New England Journal of Medicine actually has an article in which they reference my book about the importance of pretotyping idea in medicine, you know, and medical devices, just as any other business. Because think about it, you have 5 genius doctors spending 5 years to develop a device, an idea that then nobody uses. So the same ethical questions apply. Now, you didn't tell me, Karina, your specific device, but the way you would pretotype it is just start with again, with the basic. What is your XYZ hypothesis? 10% of people who suffer from this condition will pay, you know, or will you know, X thousand dollars to have a surgery or to have this implant, and then you go from that, come up with an actual pretotyping technique, and you can always pretotype an idea in a way that is fully ethical. Now, sorry, for more examples, you know, feel free to send me an email with a specific idea, because it's hard to give specific answers to rather general questions.
Just out of curiosity, do you have a favorite pretotype experiment that out of all the ones you feature in the book, the morsel, the YouTube, the one night stand? Has there been one that you've, out of the library of different ones you have in the book, is there a particular one you enjoy kind of seeing someone do?
Yeah, my favorite is the Pinocchio. So the Pinocchio is where you know, Pinocchio was the puppet that pretended to be you know, an actual boy. So the example from this, by the way, I did not invent many of these pretotypes. I just collected them and gave them memorable name. So the founder of Palm Pilot, Jeff Hawkins, created the first Pinocchio. He wanted to know, would people use a device, you know, which, you know, to actually take notes, and instead of going off and building it, he just made a little wooden version of it, which you can see at the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, where I've taken photos. And then he went around pretending, remember, part of pretotyping is pretending that you have the product. He went around collecting data on whether or not he would use it. So he went around and pretended this block of wood would work. So I said, hey, Hi, Robert. Should we do another one of these next week? Play along, Robert.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. By all means.
Oh, okay. Let me see what days are good for me. So I will pull out and pretend that I have a date application. Say, okay, Tuesday at 10 o'clock, I'm free to do this. So let's do it. And then he would put it back in his pocket. So the block of wood obviously did not do anything. But every time he was using it, he was noticing, how many times do I pull it out of my pocket? What do I use it for? And then he used that to inform his decision. So he proved to himself that I would use it. And as it happens, I wasn't expecting this question, but I'm here in my study and I have my favorite Pretotype. So what you see here, it says Hal. This is a can of pinto beans. I hope you can see it well. That about a year before the Amazon Echo came out, I wanted, everybody was having ideas like this. I had a Sonos speaker and I was working with Sonos and I told them, would it be great if you just had a microphone so I could just say, play me some Led Zeppelin instead of pulling out the app, opening the app and doing that. So I thought, to me, it's an idea. I love the idea, but I thought, let me Pretotype it. Let me prove to myself that I would use it. So I took a can of beans. Now, the fact that it looks a lot like a Amazon Echo is just a pure coincidence, like a coincidence. So I took a can of beans, I put some masking tape over it, and I pretended, see, this little hole is supposed to be a microphone. This is a speaker. I already predicted you would want a stop listening button, right? And then what did I do? So this is a mock-up, right? So this is how I Pretotype it. What data do I want to collect? The data I wanted to collect is, would I actually use this device? So I put it, in my study, and then I pretendotype that it would be functional. And I called mine Hal, as in the 2001 science fiction. So I would say, hey, Hal, play me some Led Zeppelin. Or Hal, what time is it in Rome? Hal, what's the weather like tomorrow? Of course, the can of beans did not respond. Otherwise, I would have checked into a psychiatric hospital. But I realized and thought, my gosh, I would use this thing a lot. In fact, I realized I would want one in my study, one in the living room, and one in our bedroom to wake me up in the morning. The moment that Amazon Echo was launched, I ordered 3 and I ended up using them almost exactly as I did in my Pretotype. So I collected my own data. So that's my favorite type of Pretotype.
And one of the things I think that isn't stated enough about the very back of the book, you talk about some best practices or some things that you want to remind people of. One of them that stuck with me was make sure that whatever you're attempting to Pretotype, that you're doing something that really motivates you. So that's something that you are intrinsically motivated by, maybe it scratches your own itch, because when the failure comes and your ideas don't really hit the market well or aren't validated by the market, you can withstand or understand those failures better and still have the drive to move forward. And you're not just doing a one and out, right. So that your choice is really conditioned upon what you really are motivated by.
Yes, that's a good point. I don't know if I wrote about it in the book, but my favorite example is this guy who had an idea for a diaper delivery service. So I forget his name. Let's say, hey, Bob, why are you interested in doing a diaper delivery service? Are you a new dad? He said, no, I'm not a dad. I don't have any kids. And then I thought, well, have you thought, even if this is successful, do you really want to be in the diaper delivery service? I don't even think it was delivery, some kind of, it had to do with diapers. So really diapers your passion. He said, no, but this is an idea. I think it would work. And so of course he can try, but as you said, Robert, you probably want to make sure that you're passionate, because otherwise you're going to be stuck in diapers up to your neck. And if it's not successful, it's going to be very, very painful.
A lot of garbage bags. It's not going to be fun. The cleanup will be enormously painful. We're getting close to the top of the hour, so I want to close up with a couple of questions. The one I really want to ask you is, what's the biggest lesson you've learned about Pretotyping since you published the book last year?
So the biggest lesson I've learned is that for people to be successful with Pretotyping, they actually have to unlearn a bunch of stuff, right? So they've this whole idea that, well, what about the business plan? I mean, and I know I pick on business plan. You know why I pick on business plan? Because I spent many weeks, probably months of my life writing business plans, and none of them turned out the way they're works of fiction, right? Just like nothing happened as it was in the business plan. So the biggest challenge for companies and individuals is to unlearn the fact that you don't need a business plan at the beginning. Start with the XYZ hypothesis. The XYZ hypothesis will tell you if you have a business, and then you write a business plan. Most people write a business plan before knowing that there is a business to write about. Then I would say the other thing I've learned is that Pretotyping, I made it as simple as possible, right? I mean, it cannot be simpler than the XYZ hypothesis. I've distilled all of these things into very, very simple formulas, but simple doesn't mean easy. And let me tell you what the hard part of Pretotyping is. It's stepping out of what I call thought land, right? So writing a business plan is actually fun because it's fantasy. You know, it's like writing your own little Game of Thrones with all these characters and all this stuff that happens, right? So, you know, and as long as you live in fantasy land, by the way, the background behind you looks like Fantasy Island, right? So, you know, sometimes I tell people you're in Fantasy Island with your idea. So as long as you're in Fantasy Island, everything is beautiful, right? You know, all the women are strong, the men are beautiful, all the children are above average, everybody buys your product, you have this great team. With Pretotyping, you're forced to do the most difficult thing that there is, which is make contact with the market and expose yourself to rejection, right? And market rejection can be as painful as romantic rejection. You go there and you're all kind of prepped up and say, oh, look, this is my baby, this is my baby, this is my idea, don't you love it? And then just crickets. No, people don't care about it. So whenever I see resistance to my ideas to Pretotyping, is that people don't want to unlearn the old ways, because Pretotyping is very simple, but can be uncomfortable because in most cases, your original version of the idea will not be successful. Now, the good news is that every time you go to the market, you learn something. So I don't even call it failing fast. I call it learning fast. You know, this version of the idea doesn't work, but maybe if you add a little knob or we tweak it this way, it's going to work. But yes, there is pain because you're confronting and facing possible rejection for your idea.
Great. And Sandy, I know you had a question that you wanted to ask, correct?
I just want to ask, where do you see Pretotype is going to move forward in the next years?
Well, maybe thanks to people like you, more people are going to use it. I believe that the fundamentals have been laid out. I don't have any more work that I can do to lay out the fundamentals, just like the quadratic formula. It's there. Use it, right? I cannot make it any simpler, any better, or any clearer. It is a complete distillation. And if you follow the rules, if you have the XYZ hypothesis, if you take seriously the idea of skin in the game, and if you look at the Pretotyping techniques, I don't have anything to add at this point, right? Because these are the basics, and the basics work. In fact, I tell people Pretotyping cannot not work. It's very logical. I'm an engineer. You know, I build circuits and programs. For me, everything has to connect and light up at the end. You know, the program must run, must do what it does, it completes. I think it's very, very complete. The challenge is to get it spread more. And I'm, you know, I cannot do this alone. So thank you for helping to do that.
You're welcome. And one of the things I'm planning on doing starting in July is forming a small group, and because I'm a big advocate of learning by doing, is actually putting the Pretotyping method in motion so that people can start getting reps in. That's one thing to own a LeBron James basketball with a signature, and it's quite another actually getting on the court and trying to shoot hoops to make it work. So part of what my plan is that after we get done with this huge event that we've just done with the Global Virtual Design Sprint, there's going to be a call to say, like, look, let's start doing this monthly, so that no matter what experiments we try, we start figuring out what we understand about the method and apply it and learn from it and post it, so that there's more of a narrative, so you can understand, okay, we're doing this right, we're doing this wrong. So at least that's how I'm going to carry it forward beyond the initial foray into this with the event, is like, how can I basically, with the community that I'm involved with, bridge that unlearning that you're talking about, and getting out of the idea that you have to conceptually think about everything. You can get to brass tacks about what the market's going to think of your idea before you go any further.
Yeah, and by the way, I like that you mentioned reps, right? You know, repetition. When I work with large companies, they said, well, we're innovative. I said, how do you measure innovation? And it said, well, I don't know, we're innovative. We have a website about innovation. And we have a chief innovation officer. I said, no, remember, you know me. Give me the numbers. I want a metrics. And the metrics for innovation that I tell companies they should have is experiments per month or per quarter, whatever your thing is. How many new ideas do you test each quarter? You want to call yourself an innovator, measure how many prototyping experiments do you do, and then you're showing to me that you're coming up with ideas and you're validating, and that's the way to come up with it. So yes, you know, the more you prototype, the better you get at it.
Yeah, and broadcasting what the results are, no matter how good or how bad they are. Show that what you're learning. Actually show the process. Too many times people want to keep it under wraps until it's like, oh, well, got it right. But it's really the learning that people want to learn, that want to get from your perspective too, your point of view, how you change things. So I think that's just as important. So we're at time. Alberto, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really do appreciate it. It was a highlight of probably my week, probably what was my month. You should have seen that you already know about it.
You're too kind. It was a lot of fun for me too. Thank you for having me.
If you want to know more about Alberto's work, you can go to albertosavoia.com. He has a lot of links to different types of media. I definitely recommend the Stanford presentation he did last year on pretotyping. That's a pretty good kind of primer for it. He has a YouTube channel that has a lot of Q&A and extended examples of the XYZ hypothesis, the skin in the game, the examples of other people's data versus Yoda. It's all there. You can go check it out. And also the book itself, it's been out for a while. You can check it out on Amazon and other places, I imagine. But I really do encourage anyone that's getting into the space of trying out things, and especially entrepreneurs for their ideas, to check out this process and seriously consider it, because it's been working pretty well for me since I started in January, and I'm going to continue on with it. So again, Alberto, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you all. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Sandy. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Okay.
Make sure you're building the right it before you build it right. Good luck.
Yes, exactly. For those of you on Zoom that's chimed in, thank you very much for posting the questions. Sorry we couldn't get to them all. For those of you on YouTube watching in, thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next week, okay? Take care. Bye, Alberto. See you, Sandy.
Thank you.
Bye.